Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to improve the sustainability of plastics used in agriculture and their alternatives. So we need to be patient. Okay, is it on now? Can you go to the presentation mode? Right, okay. Thank you, Giulia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for giving me and FAO the opportunity of being here today, presenting our work on plastics used in agriculture. My name is Giulia Carcasci. I'm agricultural plastics and sustainability specialist for the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment with FAO. I won't talk for too long about the problems of plastics used unsustainably in agriculture, because I feel like that's what we've been focusing on the last couple of days. And again, this audience is probably much more knowledgeable than I am on this. Let me just recap very briefly that plastics are widely used in agri-food systems today and in agriculture as FAO understands it, which is, by the way, both terrestrial agriculture, so crop production, livestock, forestry, but also fisheries and aquaculture. These plastic items bring a lot of benefits, but they also create pollution in soil due to plastic and microplastic pollution, as you all know. FAO published in 2021 the first global assessment report on agricultural plastics used globally. The report identifies that 12.5 million tons of plastics are used annually in agriculture. Two of the authors of this report are sitting in the room today, Richard Thompson and Marco Ricci. And the report identifies that the crop and livestock sectors account for 10.2 million tons of these plastics. Then we have following fisheries and aquaculture with 2.1 and forestry with 0.2 million tons. A little bit more about benefits and trade-offs. So among the benefits, we have the increased crop yields, increased growing season, and a better quality of fresh products, alongside reduced water demand, reduced agrochemical use, and reduced food losses. However, there's also a lot of trade-offs on the use of plastics in agriculture. As you know, often there is a lack of adequate collection and disposal. This creates contamination of plastics in terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Micro and nanoplastics enter in the food supply chain. We spoke about this extensively yesterday. Also, high accumulation of plastics has been lead to decreased yields, so posing also a problem for food security. And we should not forget that plastics are associated with substantial greenhouse gases emissions along their life cycle. In FAO report, there was an assessment of the most problematic plastic products. For the detailed methodology, I invite you to go and download the report. But as you can see on the left, there is a ranking of the products that have been identified as the most problematic, the most hazardous, according to a lot of criteria that were taken into consideration. At the first position, you have polymer-coated release fertilizer. Then we have mulching films, pesticide containers, bale films and nets, EPS boxes, etc. So for these are the products that would be prioritary to tackle, take action on. And what kind of action can we take? This is exemplified on the right side of the screen, where you can see, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, the pyramid of hierarchical options that are available to us for the waste management, right? You probably have seen some version of this methodology. We start from refusing plastics and use other materials, redesigning, where we try and make plastic products more sustainable, reduce in the plastic content in favor of other content of just like using less plastics, and reuse where we can and where it is appropriate, and finally recycle and recover. A little bit more about what FAO does. So again, I work in the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment, and we're specializing in plastics used in terrestrial agriculture. However, FAO has many offices and divisions who work on plastic or microplastics from different angles. So for example, the Fisheries and Aquaculture Division, they have been looking into the plastics and microplastic pollution in oceans for quite a little bit of time. Particularly, they have a project to reduce plastic litter from maritime, transport and fishing sector. And also they have the FAO voluntary guidelines for the marking of fishing gear. As you know, ALDFG, that is the abandoned lost, otherwise discarded fishing gear, is a huge source of contaminations for oceans. FAO has been working on this, also collaborating to the Global Coast Gear Initiative. We also have Food Systems and Food Safety Division with a number of publications that have been published in the last couple of years on the topic of microplastics and similar topics and associated. One of them was also shown yesterday on screen, is the microplastics in food commodities, and we spoke a little bit about it yesterday. We have a Land and Water Division that focuses on soil health, and they have this global assessment of soil pollution. Sorry, I don't want to bore you too long, but just so you know, FAO does a lot on this. If there's anything you see on the screen and anything you read online that you would be interested in knowing more about, I invite you to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to make those connections where appropriate. And a plant production and protection division, we also have another colleague from FAO, Christine Fuel, sitting in the audience, joining from this division. They work on pesticide management, but also on the Rotterdam Convention, where they work with hazardous chemicals and pesticides. Finally, FAO also collaborates with the IAEA, that's the International Agency for Nuclear Agency, sorry, I forgot the acronym just now, but they work together to understand how nuclear isotopic techniques can detect microplastics in soil. So going back to our division and our work on plastics use in agriculture, following this release of the report in December 2021, FAO member states, national governments, through the FAO Council, mandated FAO to keep working on the issue of plastics use in agriculture, and particularly to, number one, undertake further scientific and evidence-based assessment to address the knowledge gaps that we have today around plastics use in agriculture. Number two, to develop a voluntary code of conduct on the sustainable use of plastics in agriculture, and we'll talk about that more extensively in the next slides. And number three, to support the work of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, INC, on plastic pollution to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. So, VCOC stands for Voluntary Code of Conduct on the Sustainable Use of Plastics. We're going to see this acronym a little bit on screen in the next slides. FAO is committed to conduct inclusive and transparent consultations for developing this code of conduct. Also, what's a code of conduct, right? FAO develops these soft law instruments, non-binding instruments, such as voluntary guidelines, also known as voluntary codes of conduct, to assist its members, to assist governments, but also other stakeholders of the supply chain in formulating, updating, implementing policy strategies, national plans to tackle specific environmental issues, in this case, the use of plastics in agriculture. FAO is committed to have a first draft of this voluntary code of conduct by the end of this year. Next year, and this is I'm starting from the end, next year this will be negotiated among FAO members. So what do we need to have a first draft by December? We need to have a consultation process that started in May, where we had an informal briefing for FAO members. That is, again, every time we say FAO members, it means national governments. We had a global expert meeting in June. Some of you in this room participated to that. And we're now going through regional multi-stakeholder consultations. These are meetings that are taking place in each region of the world. I mean, there's 6 big regions, so there's going to be one for each. And the one for North America already took place. And in the coming couple of months, we have the other 5. We also have online consultations. We just launched a call for written proposals on this FSN forum. I will share the link later. We would really welcome your contributions to that. And again, this will lead to the first draft being drafted by the end of this year and the negotiations around this draft in 2024. As mentioned, FAO participates to the meetings of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. We usually refer to that as the instrument or the Global Plastics Treaty for short, right? So FAO participated in person to the first INC meeting, which took place in Uruguay in December last year, and the second INC meeting took place in Paris, May this year. We'll participate in Nairobi in a few months to the third meeting. FAO is trying to bring to the negotiation table as an observer the issues of food safety, food security, but also the views of smallholder farmers, fishermen, and nutrition. And we'll see a little bit more in details about FAO positioning around this. So FAO wants to support members to ensure that the treaty considers the benefits and trade-offs of plastics, as we mentioned before, as a part of a wider agri-food system transformation to have more inclusive, regenerative agri-food systems. FAO wants to promote a holistic circular approach based on the 6R, which we mentioned before: refuse, redesign, reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover, an evidence-based approach to plastics management. Also, FAO is advocating for a treaty that includes a sector-based approach. Sector-based approach means that the treaty could recognize that there are specific sectors in which plastics, specific sectors that play a key role when it comes to plastics consumption and use, and agriculture would be one of those. Fisheries, indeed, would also be one of those. FAO also hopes that the voluntary code of conduct that is under development, as well as the voluntary codes of conduct that have already been developed, can be cross-referenced and harmonized with this new instrument. I left this slide here just to give you an idea of what the new Global Plastics Treaty may include, because I feel like it may be relevant to all of us and to all of you. What you have here is a list of the core obligations that could be included in this new treaty. For your information, the zero draft of the new Global Plastics Treaty was just published a few days ago on September 4. I invite you to Google it and have a look at what are the options around which the conversation and the negotiations will structure. As you see here, we have a number of core obligations. For example, banning, phasing out, and or reducing the use of problematic and avoidable plastic products, and how this could relate to plastics in agriculture. And this is what FAO is interested about. How do we see agriculture in all of this? The second one is about the use of chemicals of polymers of concern. Then we have reducing microplastics, super relevant to everything that we have been saying here. Strengthening waste management, design for circularity, alternatives and substitutes, eliminating the release and emission of plastics to water, soil, and air, and protecting human health. I also copied here, which I thought it would have been relevant for this presentation this morning. This is from the draft. This just came out to give you an idea of how this works, right? So this is one of the first. This is like at the very beginning. After the objective, this is what you see when you open the draft. It says primary plastic polymers. So there are several options to tackle this, and you see the options on screen. So the first one is that each party should not allow the level of production and supply to exceed the reduction target, as explained in the annex. There's no annexes yet, right? But this is one option of the content that could be in the treaty that will send you back to an annex to see what the reduction target is going to be. Another option, that you see as option 2, is instead to set global targets. And number 3 under option 2, it then says to develop nationally determined targets. So it's like every country will determine a target for them, and that's what they commit to reduce. And then you have the third option, which is the measures taken to implement this provision shall be reflected in the national plans communicated pursuant to part of national plans, and shall include the intended level of domestic supply. What does this mean? I chose this part because it exemplifies a little bit one of the sticking points that are being faced right now as the negotiations move forward on this global plastics treaty, which is the difference between a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach when it comes to the global plastics treaty. There's a number of countries who would like to see an ambitious treaty that sets reduction targets that are the same across all countries. There's other countries who would prefer a treaty that takes more into account the local circumstances and in which countries are called to develop national action plans in which they self-develop those targets and they commit to report on those reporting. This is more in line with what we have with the Paris Agreement. Sorry for taking the time to explain this, but I feel like this is relevant to all of us to really see how in practice the work you all do translates into policy making. And it's exciting because this is happening right now as we speak. Countries are taking these decisions. I also added here very briefly the part on microplastics that is mentioned in the Global Plastics Treaty. Again, here we have two options, which I found interesting for the way they are formulated, because the first one is each party, which is each country, should not allow the production, use, sale, distribution, import, or export of plastic and products containing intentionally added microplastics, any of it, except those listed in an annex. So having an annex that only lists the exceptions, otherwise it would just be banned. Another option, though, is that each party shall identify plastic and products that contain intentionally added microplastics, and they should take those necessary measures to manage, restrict it, and where appropriate, not allow. So I again invite you to keep engaging with this Global Plastics Treaty, read the articles when they come out in November after the third meeting, and let's see where we're moving on with this. Moving back, though, to what's more within FAO's control and mandate, which is the Voluntary Code of Conduct on the Sustainable Use of Plastics in Agriculture, very briefly here to say just how these two instruments will talk to each other. So the VCO will complement and support the formulation and hopefully later the implementation of the new Global Plastics Treaty by offering guidelines, best practices, and indicators that are specific to the agricultural sector, which also may be included in the treaty, but also that are specific to the agricultural sector, which, however, may be translated to other sectors. This is one of the proposals that FAO is bringing forward for the Voluntary Code of Conduct. Of course, this will need to be decided by FAO members, but the idea is that the Voluntary Code of Conduct will encompass all agricultural sectors according to FAO's definition of agriculture, that is crop and livestock production, forestry, fisheries, and aquaculture, right? So having one Voluntary Code of Conduct that covers all of these subsectors. Also, the idea is that the Code of Conduct would focus on plastics used in primary agricultural production. We talk about plastics used within farm gates, right? Without going all the way downstream into the agri-food value chain, so without leaving the farm gates and going in what would be then considered the retailing phase and going into packaging. Because one of the reasons is that there is already a number of legislations that address packaging, right? And the third one is that when it comes to the plastics life cycle, the Voluntary Code of Conduct would interest the whole plastic life cycle, right? So not only making recommendations on how plastics, for example, are used, but also about how plastics are designed, how plastics are disposed of. I believe I am at the end of my presentation. I hope this was not too long. So as I mentioned, we're going to have a number of regional consultations. Please reach out to me and I will make sure, but of course, I mean, Minagris and Papillon, a lot of people in this room are already in our database for the regional consultation we will have for Europe, especially if you have good contacts of other regions outside of Europe. We'll really try to get more voices from the global south, especially to participate in our regional consultations. In addition, as mentioned, we published a call for written proposals. You can find here the link, the QR code, and we really welcome your participation to that. If you have any questions you would like to reach out, There's my email address. I think I can share it later, but also you can reach out at the email address in here. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. We have time for questions. Okay, maybe I'll start. No great ones. Okay. So, a question is a similar one that I've done yesterday with EFSA. So I know that the role is completely different of FAO compared to the EFSA role, but do you see any forthcoming central activities of FAO for putting together all the fragmented different knowledge or expertise in a central activity that could be actually guided by FAO in the next few years?
I'm sorry, in some specific field, you mean about?
In the microplastics, nanoplastics,
in microplastics.
Yes.
So the idea, the work we're doing within my division is also to act as a focal point between all the other divisions, because again, there's a number of teams.
Yeah, I noticed that there are a lot of different teams, so that's why I asked about the fragmented expertise and knowledge, because I see that they were like four or five different groups doing different things on plastics. But I was wondering if there will be in the future a central sort of committee or that will put together all this, because it's getting really increasing the interest about it.
Indeed, thank you for the question. And we do have, as of right now, an interdepartmental working group on plastics. That's how far we got in trying and harmonize what the other divisions are doing, and try also, for example, to participate to these events as one FAO, right? I don't only represent my division, but I represent the organization, and I'm happy to make the connections again. So yeah, an interdepartmental working group for now, and let's see what the future brings. Hopefully this code of conduct, once approved, will also be a little bit of a push for FAO to become more one FAO, also when it comes to plastics and microplastics management.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Yes, Esperanza.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting, and yeah, with many challenges maybe. So my question is, from all the alternatives, options that you are giving, which of them do you see that are more promising, and which of them are more challenging?
Thank you for your question. I feel like a lot of the challenges are the ones we discussed these days, right? There's still a lot of uncertainty, for example, around, we were just speaking about it this morning, bio-based and biodegradable alternatives and their biodegradability, right? Still a lot of farmers that are unsure about these options without even going to the whole economic feasibility. I am personally thrilled about, one of the aspects I'm more thrilled about is also the recovering of like traditional and indigenous knowledge when it comes, for example, to cover crops as an alternative to plastic mulch. So all those practices that would allow us not to use plastics in the first place. I understand this is in many cases not applicable, and there are issues regarding food safety and food security. And of course, we are going to advocate for a case-by-case solutions with a holistic approach that takes, all different dimensions of sustainability in account. But I feel like there's still a long way to go for us to find those old knowledge and bring them back today.
Thank you, but we are starting. This is most important. Yes.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. Yes.
Yes, I'm very interested in having a clear definition of what is the role of the scientific community and how we contribute to your strategic developments and process. And we know that it's a broad community. Scientists work on several parallel research lines. There's not much aggregation among scientists to come up with a unified message. So it's a difficult job in itself. And participating to the expert meeting maybe is one way, but you will not have all scientists participating to that. So how can we make sure that scientific knowledge in this field, as you can see, is still quite uncertain and full of alternative truths. Sorry if I use this term. It's not yet well defined. How do we make sure that we are able to give you a useful package of information here? And how do we connect so many different groups in one single place? What do you need from us?
Thank you, Luca, for this question. A number of things. FAO, you may be aware, does not do research, scientific research in itself. It facilitates and coordinates scientific research being undertaken to inform effective policy making. The role of science is crucial into FAO and I would say UN policy making in general. All decisions need to be as science-based, as well-informed as possible. Particularly regarding the voluntary code of conduct, we had a global expert meeting, as Luca knows, and we're moving into these regional consultations. We are calling them multi-stakeholder. Indeed, academia, research institutions are one of the stakeholders involved. Private sector is another, NGOs is another, and trade associations and EPR schemes are there. It's a bit of a mixed bag. So indeed, we welcome all of those, your contributions again, through the call for proposal, and yeah, I think that's the main thing. That would be the main input. Make sure that call for proposal receives even better if aggregated inputs from the scientific community. And more in general, if I may, on the scientific contribution to this global environmental policy making, but also NIBA is involved with the Scientific Coalition for the Global Plastics Treaty, I think is really relevant. Also scientists, when they come together and they speak with one voice, I think it's easier to be heard by the negotiators.
So we have one last question.
Yeah. You mentioned the voluntary code of conduct and conduct on the Global Plastics Treaty with the different options. Now, if the plastics treaty gets, implemented, what are the timescales that we're looking at regarding, also will it ever be, for example, revision in 5 years or so, or 10 years? So how long do you think will it take that countries will start implementing it? And is there a certain date in the future where it will be revised or discussed whether those options make sense at all? Because the options that you presented, I think they have very strong long-term implications. If you choose option 1, 2, or 3, it makes a huge difference, right?
Thank you, excellent question. I'm afraid I'm not the best person to answer that, but I'll try. So the Global Plastics Treaty is set to be adopted by countries by end of 2024, so end of next year. There's going to be 3 more meetings, and then supposedly this draft will be adopted. by the conference. Then it would have to be ratified by countries, and I understand that takes a few more years. And also, the way I think it works is that these annexes that we spoke about, then they meet every other year or every 3-4 years to revise the annexes, and you can include, for example, Christine is here, she can tell a lot about the Rotterdam Convention and the way new chemicals and new pesticides are added in the annexes and the negotiations that entail. But indeed, what is in the treaty, it's very crucial that it makes sense also in the long term, and that is exactly the challenges that negotiators are faced with right now.
Thank you.
Okay, with this I would like to conclude the first presentation because we don't have more time. We would like to keep the time. If there are more questions, you will have the chance during the coffee break. Thank you very much.